The cost of living crisis. It feels like it's been going on forever now, doesn't it? And it feels like it's perhaps even worse than it's ever been before. Will the cost of living crisis ever end? And if it is going to end, how's it going to end and when's it going to end? Well, in this video, those are the questions that I'm going to answer. If you haven't seen the channel before, my name's Seb and we do videos aimed to help employees either in work or those seeking work. The purpose of the channel is to give you a very honest, real and genuine outlook on what's really going on and cut through the nonsense that's out there on the media. If you like the sound of this channel, do consider subscribing to our channel, and if you do, make sure to click the bell icon and select all so you won't miss any one of our forthcoming videos. Okay, so to kick this video off, I think we need a little bit of context about what's going on here, because it'll allow us and make it easier for us to understand, well, when's the cost of living crisis going to end and how's it going to end? And what we need to do first of all is understand a bit about what started it, what's kept it going, who's responsible, and that'll allow us to answer the question of how will it get fixed and when will it get fixed. Now, this isn't our first video on the cost of living crisis. I will put a link up there. We did have one with about 250,000 views on it, so it was pretty popular. But I think this video brings us up to date. So if you watched that video before and you liked it, you're probably going to enjoy this one as well. So what started the cost of living crisis itself? Well, let's take you back to the pandemic, and as long ago as it seems now, the reality of it is a lot happened and we've all seemingly forgot about it. It was all put on furlough, well, a lot of people were, where they were basically paid to stay at home, but that meant the government had to go and pay those people the equivalent of their wages. Companies themselves, many companies weren't allowed to trade, so they took out what was called bounce back loans and recovery loans. Loans that were allowing them to be able to trade and function with their business and very low interest rates. All of this, though, left quite a lot of debt. The government had to borrow money. It had to do it in two ways. One way was the official route of borrowing money from central banks and all sorts of stuff, and then they had to borrow that money with an interest rate and agreement to go and pay it back. Governments borrow money all the time, so nothing unusual there. But it was a chronic amount of money that you had to borrow. You basically had to sustain an economy for several months running. That was really, really difficult and unsustainable to be able to be done for a very long period of time. So the other way the government had to do it was by something called quantitative easing. Now, this is a very posh, sophisticated way of basically saying printing money. Now, for a long time, they printed money and declared that it was worth the same amount of money that it was before. However, central banks, i.e. the Bank of England and the Fed in America and stuff like that, basically had to look at it and say, right, you've printed a lot more money and the amount of money that's in circulation doesn't really match up to how much it's actually valued. So we have to devalue that money. The problem when you go and do that, if you're a government or anybody that has borrowed or printed a lot of money and all of a sudden the money that you have isn't worth as much as it was before, then all of a sudden that money that you got, you thought it was worth a certain amount, now isn't. It's worth a considerable amount less. And the added problem to this is if you have a lot of debt, i.e. you're a government that's borrowed, shed loads of money to keep your economy going, you've got to pay that money back. If that money isn't worth as much, it means that inflation's happening. And to combat inflation, central banks, like the Bank of England, what they do is they raise what's called the base rate, the interest rates in the country. And that means that it's a combat to try and bring down inflation, to stop inflation, and the government's targets generally across the globe are about 2%. They were ranging up to about 11 to 14% at one point, which was unsustainable and very dangerous. So those governments that had borrowed money, like Britain, were basically now in a position where they borrowed it cheap, kept to keep an economy going, but now the cost of paying that money back was extraordinarily expensive and they had an economy to keep going. It just meant debt was piling up. And the problem then is because the banks are trying to increase interest rates to combat it, you have a constant pushback and a never-ending cycle of things getting more and more expensive for everybody. Governments is getting more expensive to pay back their money, and it trickles down to companies that are making it expensive to be able to do certain things and function, employees that are then finding out that their money isn't going as far as it was before, because to combat things getting more expensive for companies, they've had to put all their prices up, which means the consumers had to pay more, and the amount of your money that you had in the first place isn't going as far because of inflation. It all creates a complete and utter nightmare, and that is effectively the cost of living crisis in a nutshell. So, who's responsible for this? Well, ultimately, the government. They're responsible. They're responsible for getting us in this mess, but they're also responsible for getting us out of this mess. Now, regardless of your opinion, taking out money to be able to stabilise the economy and protect the NHS in the first place, I agreed with at the time. You've got to do what you've got to do. But going on for this long, it's not great. And here's why it's not great in terms of not just now, but moving forward. Because the government, they're not in any way interested in trying to sort this out at any point soon. And you'll have people tell you otherwise, but I'm going to explain why they're not interested in sorting this out at any point soon. You see, the way we make our money as employees is we make our money through basically our wages. We get paid to do a job by a company. The way a company earns its money is through the sales of goods and services, and the way a government makes its money is through taxable income. Now, the government themselves have got this cost of living crisis, and they're using this cost of living crisis to be able to benefit themselves, because what they want to do is they want to make as much taxable income as they can to be able to pay off the debts, level the books, and be able to sort the economy out. Who's going to be able to pay that to them? Who gives them that taxable income? Well, that's companies, and that's going to be the consumer. And although there are various routes the government can get their tax income from, it comes from two main routes. One of them is through PAYE, i.e. income tax, which is the tax you and I will pay on our wages. And the other is through VAT, the money that is passed on from companies that are private companies that are selling their goods and services. Now, because costs have gone up so much for companies, they've had to raise their prices. And because they've had to raise their prices, it's meant more cost for the consumer. So the consumer's gone, well, I need more wages. So the companies have had to pay more wages for staff, otherwise risk losing them to other companies that would be willing to pay them more wages. And this has caused a bit of a ripple effect, because people are having to pay a lot more money, but they're not seeing their money going as far as it was before because of interest rates and inflation. So the government, they're profiteering out of this. They're profiteering from two routes. One route is what's known as stealth tax. Now, stealth tax, to explain how this works, is you, for your first £12,700 of earnings between April and April in the financial year, well, you don't get taxed on it. That's known as your personal allowance. That's free taxable income. But from £12,700 up to mid-30s, you'll be charged 20%. And if you earn over mid-30s, well, that bracket is all charged at 40%. And there is a 45% tax bracket quite high up there. But it's this 40% tax bracket that's the stealth tax. You see, what's meant to happen is the government are meant to realistically alter where the tax brackets come in, that 20% where it comes in, where that 40% comes in line with inflation, to make it fair. But they haven't, have they? No, what they've done is they've left it as it is. So therefore, employees that are getting paid more and more money, more and more of them are falling into the 40% tax bracket, and more of them are paying more than the 40% tax bracket. The government, meanwhile, are making coin out of this, making loads of money. But the same people that are getting paid more money on paper actually aren't seeing as much of it, because they're giving more and more of it to the government. What about companies, though? Well, they're in the spot where they're having to charge more and more in terms of prices to be able to cover everything, because things have got more expensive for them. Supply chains, interest rates, all sorts of stuff, borrowing costs, the amount of wage bills they're having to pay. So it's costing them more money. So items that were worth, let's say, £100 are now going for £200. And £20 of VAT on that £100 item is now £40 VAT on that £200 item. So they're making money out of that, the government. They're coining it in via two routes. And they're not in any interest to bring this under control, because that would mean reducing their taxable income, which is pointless. Now, the Bank of England are battling with the government basically to try and basically moderate the value of the pound so it doesn't bankrupt the country. Meanwhile, the government are trying to increase the amount of tax rates they're making, and that battle is causing a prolonged stagnation in the economy. So how long is this going to go on for, this stagnation? Well, I see it as going on in 6-month windows now. This 6 months of the year, realistically, probably not going to be great for the economy. Officially, we've had a recession. We're probably out of it now, but it's not going to feel much different. The second 6 months of the year, there will be an improvement, but it's going to be very gradual. And you only really notice much difference every sort of 6 months or so. My theory, it will probably take until about maybe into 2027 until we feel it's more normal and we feel prosperity in the economy again. It's just going to drag on. I don't see the UK economy doing very well, and it will be in 0 point something percentage growth for some time yet. I just don't see it being great. And that it's been caused by the government, and it's being prolonged by the government. And not to be a downer on it, there's going to be an election coming up. So if you're thinking, I hate the Tories, I'm going to vote Labour, I hate to bring her bad news, but they're still inheriting the same debt. They'll still need to pay it off. And whoever you vote for, well, ultimately the government gets in. So read it as you will, but hopefully this video has given you an explanation of what's going on, how long it's going to go on for, and who's responsible for it. If you like this video, do give us a thumbs up, and if you want to see more of our content, do consider subscribing to the channel and select or click the bell icon and select all so you won't miss any one of our forthcoming videos.